Divine feminine, divine masculine. Listen to me carefully. There's a point on the twin flame journey where no contact stops being space. It stops being healing. It stops being, I just need time. And it becomes a spiritual consequence. Because prolonged no contact doesn't just create distance between two people, it creates pressure inside the soul. At first, silence feels like control. It feels like protection. It feels like peace. But over time, that silence starts doing something dangerous. It starts rewiring your nervous system. It starts draining your energy. It starts turning love into heaviness. It starts turning longing into collapse. And the worst part, you don't even notice it happening at first. Because on the outside, everything looks normal. You're working, you're living, you're moving forward. But internally, something starts breaking. The divine masculine begins to feel empty, not free. He begins to feel restless, not calm. He begins to feel haunted, not healed. And the divine feminine, she doesn't just miss him. She starts detaching, not because she stopped loving, but because her soul refuses to stay trapped in uncertainty forever. So if you've been in prolonged no contact, and you feel the energy getting heavier instead of quieter, if you've been having dreams, anxiety, strange signs, sudden emotional waves, stay with me. Because prolonged no contact with your twin flame will cause this. And once it starts, it changes everything about the next stage of your journey. Divine feminine, divine masculine. In the beginning, no contact can feel like relief. It can feel like the nervous system finally gets a break. It can feel like the pressure is gone. It can feel like the silence is safer than the intensity. And for a short time, it works. Because when emotions are overwhelming, distance can create space to breathe, space to think, space to calm down, space to stop reacting from wounds and triggers. But there comes a point on this twin flame journey where no contact stops feeling like peace. And the first person who usually feels it is the divine masculine. Because peace is not the same as numbness. And what many masculines call peace is actually emotional shutdown. At first, he convinces himself the silence is healing him. He tells himself he's being responsible. He tells himself he's protecting his peace. He tells himself he's avoiding drama, avoiding confusion, avoiding pain. But deep down, he's not healing. He's hiding, and hiding always has an expiration date. Divine feminine, prolonged no contact becomes dangerous because the connection doesn't disappear just because communication stops. The bond doesn't shut off because the phone is silent. The soul doesn't detach just because the ego wants control. The imprint is still there. The energetic cord is still active. The connection is still moving in the unseen. So while he's pretending he's fine on the outside, his inner world starts getting heavier. He may still go to work. He may still laugh with friends. He may still act normal. He may still post online. He may still distract himself with routine. But internally, something begins to feel off. Because the silence doesn't create calm. It creates emptiness. And emptiness doesn't feel like peace. It feels like disconnection. Divine Feminine, this is when the masculine starts. Noticing his life feels quieter, but not clearer. Less intense, but also less meaningful. Less emotional, but also less alive. Because this connection didn't just bring attraction, it brought awakening. It brought self-awareness. It brought reflection. It brought truth. It brought the mirror he couldn't run from. And when he cut you off, he didn't just cut off communication. He cut off the mirror. He cut off the part of him that was being activated. The part of him that was being forced to grow. The part of him that was being confronted with his own patterns. Divine Feminine, the twin flame connection doesn't only trigger love, it triggers transformation. So when he chooses prolonged no contact, what he's really choosing is to pause the transformation. But the universe doesn't pause the transformation. It just makes it louder, because the soul doesn't accept avoidance as a final answer. And that's why no contact eventually stops feeling like peace, because the divine masculine doesn't just miss you. He misses the version of himself he felt around you, the one who couldn't pretend, the one who couldn't hide, the one who felt real, the one who was being forced into honesty. Divine Feminine, when the masculine is still in ego, he thinks no contact is power. He thinks silence means control. He thinks distance makes him strong. He believes pulling away gives him the upper hand. He believes disappearing protects him from vulnerability. He believes if he stays away long enough, the feelings will fade. But the truth is, what he avoids emotionally, his body starts carrying, and this is where the peace starts turning into pressure. He starts feeling restless. He starts feeling heavy. He starts feeling drained. He starts feeling irritated for no reason. He starts feeling disconnected from joy, disconnected from purpose, disconnected from himself. Because prolonged no contact doesn't free him. It traps him inside his own unresolved emotions. Divine Feminine, silence becomes a prison when the soul is still engaged, because now he's alone with everything he avoided: his fear, his shame, his regret, his attachment wounds, his patterns of running, his need for control, his inability to be consistent. And there's no distraction strong enough to silence that forever. He can date, he can work more, he can stay busy, he can pretend, but the connection keeps whispering in the background, not as romance, as awareness. Because the twin flame bond doesn't just haunt him with memories, it confronts him with truth. And truth is what his nervous system starts reacting to. Divine Feminine, this is when no contact stops feeling like peace, because the masculine begins to feel the split inside himself. His mind says, "Stay away," but his soul says, "This isn't finished." And that internal conflict becomes tension, a quiet heaviness, a background pressure, a feeling of being unfinished. Peace feels stable. Peace feels aligned. Peace feels like grounding. But what he starts feeling in prolonged no contact is not peace. It's pressure. And pressure always forces a shift, because eventually the divine masculine realizes something painful. I didn't heal in silence. I decayed in silence. I didn't grow. I avoided. I didn't find clarity. I lost myself. And once he reaches that awareness, he can't pretend no contact is helping him anymore. Divine Feminine, this is where prolonged no contact starts revealing its real effect. Because most people think silence makes the connection fade. But on a twin flame journey, prolonged silence doesn't always make it quieter. Sometimes it makes it heavier. At first, no contact feels like the intensity finally calmed down, like the emotional storms stopped, like the triggers disappeared, like the pressure is gone. But then something strange happens. Instead of the energy dissolving, it concentrates. Divine Feminine, the longer the connection is avoided, the more it builds in the unseen. Because the bond isn't just emotional, it's energetic, it's spiritual, it's imprinted. So when communication stops, the energy doesn't stop moving. It just stops having a place to land. And when energy has nowhere to land, it becomes pressure. This is why prolonged no contact often feels like a constant background weight, like something is hanging in the air, like something unfinished is following you, like you can't fully relax, because your soul knows the truth. even when your ego tries to deny it. Divine Masculine. This is usually the stage where you start feeling the heaviness first, not as romance, as tension. You feel restless for no reason. You feel irritated for no reason. You feel drained even when nothing is wrong. You feel like you can't settle, like your mind is always running, and you may not connect it to the twin flame bond right away, because you'll tell yourself it's stress, work, life, fatigue, burnout. But deep down, you know something is off, because when the energy becomes heavier, it's not coming from the outside. It's coming from inside you. It's the part of you that knows you're avoiding something real. Divine Feminine, this is also where you start noticing something. Even when you're not thinking about them, you still feel them. You can be doing your routine, focused on your day, trying to stay grounded, trying to move forward, and then out of nowhere, you feel a wave, a sudden sadness, a tight chest, a heavy mood, a longing that doesn't make sense, a memory that drops into your mind like it was placed there. And that's when you realize the silence didn't remove the bond. It just removed the conversation. Divine Feminine, prolonged no contact makes the energy heavier because both souls remain connected, but neither side is expressing the truth. So the truth becomes pressure. The unspoken becomes weight. The unfinished becomes louder. And this is why the energy starts showing up in ways that feel confusing. You start seeing signs, repeating numbers, synchronicities, their name everywhere, songs that trigger memories, dreams that feel too real. And it's not because the universe is trying to torture you. It's because the universe is trying to move the connection forward. Because the twin flame bond is designed to evolve, not to stay stuck. Divine Masculine, when the energy becomes heavier instead of quieter, you may start feeling like your life is fine, but you're not. You may still function, still perform, still show up, still act normal. But internally, you feel empty because the connection activated something in you that you can't deactivate. And the longer you stay in silence, the more you start feeling the consequence of avoidance. Divine Feminine, this is also the stage where the feminine begins to shift in a way the masculine doesn't expect. Because at first, the feminine misses him deeply. She waits. She hopes. She holds the energy. But prolonged no contact does something to her too. It starts transforming longing into detachment. Not because she stopped loving, but because her soul refuses to stay in limbo forever. So the energy becomes heavier because the feminine is slowly releasing and the masculine is slowly collapsing. One is moving into self-respect. The other is trapped in avoidance. And that creates a spiritual imbalance. Divine feminine, when the energy becomes heavier, it's because the connection is reaching a pressure point, a moment where something must change, because the bond can't stay suspended forever. Either it evolves or it breaks the illusion. Either it moves toward truth or it forces consequence. And that's why prolonged no contact starts feeling heavier than the connection ever felt when you were speaking. Because now it's not love being expressed, it's love being suppressed. And suppressed love doesn't disappear, it becomes weight, it becomes tension, it becomes spiritual pressure. And eventually, that pressure demands a shift. Divine feminine. This is where prolonged no contact stops being a choice and starts becoming a consequence. Because when the divine masculine stays away for too long, something begins to happen inside him that he can't control anymore. He starts collapsing internally, not in a dramatic way that everyone can see, not in a way that makes him look weak on the outside, but in a quiet way, a slow breakdown that happens behind the scenes. Because the masculine can handle external pressure. He can handle work, responsibility, deadlines, stress, chaos. But it's internal pressure, soul pressure, that's different. Because the twin flame connection doesn't just trigger emotions, it triggers identity. It triggers awareness. It forces the masculine to face parts of himself he spent his whole life avoiding. So when he chooses prolonged no contact, he thinks he's escaping the intensity. He thinks he's escaping the feelings. He thinks he's escaping the responsibility of being seen. But he's not escaping anything, he's just carrying it alone. And carrying it alone is what breaks him. Divine feminine, the masculine collapses internally because silence doesn't remove the bond, it removes the regulation. When he was around you, even if he didn't admit it, your energy stabilized him. Your presence brought him back to himself. Your frequency softened his nervous system in a way he didn't understand. So when he cuts you off, he doesn't just lose connection to you, he loses connection to his own heart. And that's when he starts feeling symptoms that don't make sense. He feels restless. He feels heavy. He feels disconnected. He feels like nothing satisfies him. He feels like life is flat. He may still chase pleasure. He may still chase validation. He may still chase distraction, but it doesn't land. Because once a man touches something real, surface living starts feeling empty. Divine feminine, this is where the masculine starts getting triggered by things that never used to trigger him. Little problems feel bigger. Small stress feels overwhelming. He becomes impatient, irritable, short-tempered, and he doesn't connect it to the twin flame bond. He thinks he's just tired, but it's deeper than tired. It's dysregulation. It's the nervous system carrying suppressed truth. Because what he refuses to process emotionally, his body process for him. Divine feminine, this is where he starts waking up at night. He may have insomnia. He may wake up suddenly with anxiety. He may dream about you constantly. He may feel pressure in his chest, and he won't tell anyone because the masculine suffers privately. He would rather act like he's fine than admit he's breaking. So he holds it in, and holding it in becomes poison. Divine feminine, the internal collapse also shows up as mental noise. His mind starts looping. He replays moments, what he said, what he didn't say, what he did, what he avoided. He starts thinking about you even when he doesn't want to. Not because he's obsessed, but because his soul is awake. And once the soul is awake, it doesn't let you forget what matters. Divine feminine, prolonged no contact, forces the masculine to sit with himself, and that is the thing he fears the most. Because when he sits with himself, he feels everything. He feels the regret. He feels the guilt. He feels the loss. He feels the shame. Not shame because he misses you. Shame because he knows he ran. He knows he avoided. He knows he ghosted. He knows he left you holding pain he created. And that awareness becomes unbearable over time. Divine feminine, this is why the masculine collapses internally. Because no contact doesn't just separate him from you. It separates him from his own integrity. It separates him from his own truth. And when a man is disconnected from his truth, his entire life starts feeling unstable. He may still look successful, but he feels empty. He may still look confident, but he feels lost. He may still look in control, but internally, he's spiraling. Divine feminine, the collapse gets worse the longer he stays away. Because the longer he stays silent, the more he realizes he doesn't know how to return. He starts thinking, it's been too long. I ruined it. She won't forgive me. She moved on. I don't even know what to say. So he avoids more. And avoidance creates more pressure. And pressure creates more collapse. Until one day, the masculine reaches a breaking point. not because the feminine forced him, but because the silence finally broke him. Because prolonged no contact doesn't heal a running masculine, it exposes him. And exposure forces awakening or destruction, and that's when the journey shifts. The divine feminine. This is the part people don't talk about enough. Because everyone focuses on what prolonged no contact does to the divine masculine, but they forget what it does to you. And what it does to you is powerful. Because prolonged no contact doesn't just make you miss him. It changes you. It rewires you. It forces your soul into a decision you didn't want to make at first. Divine feminine. There comes a moment where you stop waiting the same way. Not because you stopped loving, not because you became cold, not because you suddenly don't care, but because your soul refuses to stay in uncertainty forever. At first, you hold the connection, you feel the bond, you feel the pull, you feel the love, and you try to understand him. You make excuses for him. You tell yourself he's healing. You tell yourself he's processing. You tell yourself he's just scared. And divine feminine, sometimes that's true, but prolonged no contact does something to your heart. It teaches you that love without clarity becomes suffering. It teaches you that loyalty without reciprocation becomes self-abandonment. It teaches you that holding space for someone who keeps running eventually turns into you losing yourself. And that's when the detachment begins. Not as a choice, as a survival response. Divine feminine, detachment doesn't always look like moving on. Sometimes detachment looks like silence. Not silence to punish him, silence to protect you. Because there comes a point where your nervous system gets tired of hoping, tired of guessing, tired of reading signs, tired of feeling everything alone. So your body starts doing something your mind resisted for a long time. It starts releasing. You start waking up and thinking about him less. You start feeling calmer, not because the bond is gone, but because you stopped feeding the anxiety. You stop checking. You stop waiting for the message. You stop replaying the last conversation. You stop trying to decode his behavior. Divine feminine, the reason this detachment is so powerful is because it's not forced. It's natural. It's the feminine returning to her center. It's the feminine choosing herself. It's the feminine remembering, I am not meant to beg for love. I am not meant to chase clarity. I am not meant to suffer in silence while he hides. Divine feminine, prolonged no contact forces you to upgrade. Because you can't stay emotionally available to someone who keeps disappearing. You can't keep your heart open to someone who refuses to show up. So the universe starts shifting you. You start seeing the connection differently. You start seeing him differently. You start seeing yourself differently. And you realize love is not enough when there is no consistency. Chemistry is not enough when there is no courage. Spiritual connection is not enough when there is no action. Divine feminine, this is where the masculine starts feeling you pull away energetically, even if he doesn't know why, even if he doesn't admit it, even if he tries to act like he doesn't care. He feels the shift because your energy was the thing that held the cord stable. Your love was the thing that kept the bond soft. Your presence was the thing that regulated the connection. And when you detach, the masculine feels it like a loss of oxygen. He starts feeling the silence differently, because now it's not just him hiding. Now it's you leaving the emotional space you used to hold. Divine feminine, this detachment is not punishment. It's alignment. It's your soul refusing to stay stuck in limbo. Because the feminine is not meant to live in waiting energy. She is meant to live in receiving energy. And prolonged no contact breaks the receiving. It breaks the trust. It breaks the softness. So the feminine evolves. She stops begging the universe for a message and starts building a life that doesn't depend on one. Divine feminine, this is why prolonged no contact causes a spiritual reversal. The one who ran starts feeling trapped. The one who waited starts feeling free. The one who avoided starts feeling pressure. The one who held on starts letting go. And that shift is the most dangerous thing for an unhealed masculine, because now he realizes he didn't just lose access to her body. He lost access to her energy. And once a feminine detaches from the core, it takes something real to bring her back. Not words, not excuses, not temporary emotion. Truth, action, consistency, divine feminine, prolonged no contact will cause this. It will cause you to detach without forcing it. And that detachment becomes the moment everything changes. Because now, either he rises or you release. And both outcomes lead you back to yourself. Divine feminine, divine masculine. This is where prolonged no contact starts feeling unreal. Because the longer you stay disconnected physically, the more the connection starts showing up spiritually. And that's when the dreams begin. Not random dreams, not I ate something weird dreams. but dreams that feel like meetings, dreams that feel like conversations you never had in real life, dreams that feel emotional, dreams that feel intimate, dreams that leave you waking up with a heavy chest. Divine Feminine. This is when many of you start saying, "Why do I keep dreaming about him if we're not talking? Why does it feel like he's with me in the dream? Why do I wake up missing him more? Why does it feel like the bond is getting louder?" Because prolonged no contact doesn't shut the connection off. It removes the physical outlet. So the energy starts leaking into the subconscious. It starts showing up through dreams, signs, and nervous system reactions. Divine Masculine. This is also when you start experiencing things you can't explain. You wake up thinking about her for no reason. You feel her energy randomly during the day. You get a memory that hits you like a wave. You hear a song and it knocks the air out of your chest, and you try to push it away. You try to stay logical. You try to stay in control. But the more you resist, the more intense it becomes. Because resistance doesn't erase energy, it compresses it. Divine Feminine, this is where the signs start becoming constant. Repeating numbers, synchronicities, his name everywhere, random reminders that feel impossible to ignore. And some people will tell you it's just your mind. But Divine Feminine, you know the difference between obsession and resonance. You know when something is spiritual. You know when something is being activated. And prolonged no contact activates the bond in a different way. Because the universe starts speaking louder when both people refuse to speak truth. Divine Feminine, the nervous system overload begins when the soul is still engaged, but the reality is still silent. You start feeling waves of anxiety, not because you're weak, but because your body is carrying uncertainty. Your heart wants clarity. Your soul wants movement. Your nervous system wants resolution. But the connection is suspended. So your system stays in a state of waiting. And waiting becomes tension. Divine Masculine. This is when you start feeling the consequences physically. You may feel restless. You may feel pressure in your chest. You may feel heavy and drained. You may struggle to sleep. You may feel like you can't fully relax. And you won't say it's because of her. You'll call it stress. You'll call it fatigue. You'll call it life. But deep down, you know it's the bond. Because the bond is not just emotional. It's energetic imprint. And once it's imprinted, silence doesn't erase it. It makes it echo. Divine Feminine, prolonged no contact causes nervous system overload because the connection becomes a constant background frequency. Even when you're not thinking about them, you feel them. You feel the pull. You feel the unfinished energy. You feel the something is coming. And that anticipation can be exhausting because you don't know if it's union or closure. Divine feminine. This is where many feminines start having emotional waves out of nowhere. You're fine, then you're crying, you're calm, then you feel heavy, you're grounded, then you feel triggered, and you start asking yourself, am I healing or am I breaking? But the truth is, your nervous system is processing what your mind can't control. It's processing the energetic tension of a bond that is still alive. Divine masculine, this is also where the dreams can start exposing truth. You may dream of her crying. You may dream of her leaving. You may dream of her moving on. You may dream of her looking at you with disappointment, because the soul knows what the ego avoids. And the ego can hide in silence, but the soul keeps speaking. Divine feminine, prolonged no contact will cause this. It will cause the connection to show up through dreams, signs, and nervous system overload, not to torture you, to push the journey forward, because at some point, the universe stops allowing avoidance to feel comfortable. And when that happens, the bond becomes louder than the silence. And that's when the next shift begins. Divine feminine, divine masculine. This is where prolonged no contact becomes dangerous in a new way. Because at first, silence feels like protection. It feels like control. It feels like safety. It feels like I'm preventing more damage. But over time, that same silence turns into regret, and regret turns into self-sabotage. Divine masculine. This is usually the stage where you start realizing something painful. You didn't create peace. You created a wound, not in her, in you. Because the longer you stay away, the more you begin to feel the weight of what you didn't do, the conversations you avoided, the truth you refused to say, the apology you never gave, the courage you never showed. And the mind starts replaying it over and over, not because you're obsessed, but because your soul is demanding accountability. Divine feminine, this is also where the masculine starts feeling haunted by his own decisions. He starts remembering the moments where you were still open, still soft, still willing to understand. He remembers how you tried, how you waited, how you loved. And he realizes he didn't just lose a connection. He pushed away something sacred. And that realization hurts, because now he can't blame anyone else. He can't blame timing. He can't blame circumstances. He can't blame confusion. He has to face the truth. I ran. I avoided. I sabotaged. Divine masculine, regret doesn't always show up as tears. Sometimes regret shows up as anger. You become irritated at everything. You lose patience. You feel frustrated for no reason, because anger is easier than vulnerability. But underneath that anger, there's grief, there's loss. There's the awareness that you damaged something you didn't know how to hold. Divine feminine, prolonged no contact creates self-sabotage because the masculine starts making choices from pressure instead of truth. He reaches out impulsively, then disappears again. He gets emotional, then shuts down again. He opens the door, then slams it again. Not because he doesn't care, but because he's fighting himself. He wants relief, but he fears responsibility. He wants connection, but he fears being exposed. He wants you, but he fears the version of himself he has to become to deserve you. Divine feminine, this is where many feminines get confused, because he starts sending mixed signals. He watches you, he circles you, he checks your social media, he likes something, he unblocks you, he says something small, but he still doesn't show up with consistency. And divine feminine, that's because regret can make a man reactive, but it doesn't automatically make him mature. Regret creates pressure, and pressure creates movement. But movement is not always growth. Sometimes movement is panic. Sometimes it's fear of losing access. Sometimes it's fear of consequence. Divine masculine, this is where the silence becomes unbearable, because you start realizing the longer you wait, the harder it becomes to return. You start thinking, it's been too long. She's done with me. She won't trust me. She moved on. I don't even know what to say. And that creates more fear, and fear creates more avoidance. So instead of fixing it, you sabotage more. You disappear again. You distract yourself again. You pretend you don't care again. But the regret grows because silence doesn't erase what happened. Silence records it. Every day you don't choose truth becomes another day your soul remembers. Divine feminine, this is also where the feminine's detachment becomes permanent if the masculine doesn't rise. Because the feminine can feel when a man is reaching out from truth and when he's reaching out from pressure. And the feminine is no longer available for cycles. She's no longer available for half effort. She's no longer available for emotional crumbs. So when he comes back without growth, it triggers her self-respect. It triggers her boundaries. It triggers her awakening. Divine masculine, prolonged no contact turns into self-sabotage when you realize you didn't heal, you delayed, you didn't protect the bond, you avoided the truth, and now the silence is no longer calm. It's a mirror. It reflects your patterns back to you. It shows you who you've been, and it forces a decision. Either you keep running and destroy yourself slowly, or you face the truth and rise. Divine feminine, divine masculine. This is where the journey reaches the edge. Because once silence becomes regret, you can't go back to pretending it's peace. Divine feminine. This is the chapter where everything becomes real. Because prolonged no contact always leads to one truth. Something has to change. Not later, not when it feels easier, not when the timing is perfect. Now. Because prolonged no contact doesn't freeze the journey. It forces the journey to evolve in the background. And eventually, that evolution shows up in your reality. Divine feminine. People love to romanticize no contact. They call it divine timing. They call it healing. They call it space. They call it a test. But prolonged no contact is not neutral. It produces an outcome. It produces a shift. Because silence is not empty. Silence is a decision, and the longer that decision continues, the more the universe responds to it. Divine masculine, prolonged no contact means you either rise into truth or you lose the connection in the way you feared most. Not because the bond disappears, but because the feminine stops offering access. Because a feminine can love you deeply and still choose herself. She can feel you spiritually and still close the door physically. She can hold the bond in her soul and still refuse the cycle. Divine feminine. This is where your power becomes undeniable. Because your soul starts making choices your heart avoided. You stop chasing union like a fantasy, and you start requiring union as a reality. Not words, not emotion, not longing. Consistency, truth, effort, alignment. And that's why prolonged no contact becomes the line in the sand, because it reveals who is actually ready and who is still hiding. Divine masculine, if you are truly awakening, prolonged no contact becomes unbearable. Not because you miss her attention, but because you miss your integrity. You miss the version of yourself that felt real. You miss the truth you avoided, and you begin to understand. Union isn't about getting her back. Union is about becoming the man who can hold her. Because the feminine is not returning to a version of you that disappears. She's not returning to confusion. She's not returning to emotional absence. She's not returning to spiritual breadcrumbs. So prolonged no contact forces you to face the hardest question. Am I willing to rise, or am I willing to lose her? Divine Feminine, this is also where many of you experience the deepest spiritual release. Because you finally stop trying to control the outcome. You stop begging the universe to make him choose you. You stop trying to stay available just in case. And you start surrendering in a new way, not surrendering your worth, surrendering the illusion. The illusion that love alone is enough. The illusion that patience will replace effort. The illusion that a running masculine will become consistent without consequence. Divine Feminine, this is where you start living again. You start smiling again. You start building again. You start creating a life that is not dependent on his return. And that is exactly why the outcome becomes clear. Because prolonged no contact will either create union or create release. And both outcomes are a form of victory. Because both outcomes bring you back to yourself. Divine Masculine, if you rise with action, not with speeches, not with sudden emotional messages, not with intensity that fades after 2 days. You rise with consistency. You rise with accountability. You rise with truth. Because the feminine doesn't need proof that you feel it. She needs proof that you can hold it. And if you cannot, then prolonged no contact becomes the universe protecting her. Because the twin flame journey is not here to destroy the feminine, it's here to awaken both. Divine Feminine, if release is what happens, it doesn't mean the bond was fake. It means the lesson was real. It means the purpose was fulfilled. It means the connection did what it came to do. It awakened you. It restored your self-respect. It returned you to your power. And sometimes that is the highest form of union with yourself. Divine Feminine, Divine Masculine. Prolonged no contact will cause this. It will force the journey into a final shift. Either truth creates reunion, or truth creates closure. Either way, the era of waiting ends. Because prolonged no contact doesn't last forever. It either becomes awakening or it becomes an ending. And the soul always chooses what is aligned.